Brenda stood near the back of the hotel ballroom, carefully balancing a glass of champagne she had no intention of drinking. Laughter echoed off the chandeliered ceilings. Sleek suits, glittering dresses, and polite small talk filled the air. She adjusted the neckline of her top dress and glanced around. Martin, her husband of 35 years, was across the room, surrounded by colleagues and clients. He hadn't introduced her to anyone yet. Again, she smiled politely at a woman who brushed past her, then checked her watch. 40 minutes since they arrived. Not a single acknowledgement from her husband, beyond a quick "you look great" in the car. Martin was a senior executive now. These were his people, his knights, his spotlight. And she was Martin's wife, politely nodded at and politely forgotten. Brenda had long grown used to it, the polite smile, the silent standing, the invisible presence at events like these. It was easier to blend in than to ask why she wasn't ever part of the story. She stepped toward the dessert table, hoping to kill a few minutes nibbling on fruit she didn't want. "Excuse me." Brenda turned. A woman in her 60s, elegant, in a navy pantsuit, stood beside her, sharp eyes, silver hair swept into a low twist. Power in her posture. "Elaine," the woman said, offering a hand. "I'm Martin's boss." Brenda blinked. "Oh, hi. I'm Brenda. I know." Elaine gave her a half smile. Then, without pause or hesitation, she leaned in and said it. "He doesn't see you, does he?" The words landed like a slap, soft-spoken but cutting. Brenda froze, stunned. "I'm sorry." Elaine straightened, casually plucked a strawberry from the table. "It's not my business, of course, but I notice things. That's part of my job." She popped the strawberry into her mouth, gave a nod, and walked away, leaving Brenda staring after her. Her world suddenly cracked open. The drive home was quiet. Martin hummed along to some classic rock station, oblivious. Brenda stared out the window, Elaine's words looping in her mind. "He doesn't see you." That night, after Martin fell asleep, still in his dress shirt, snoring softly, Brenda padded into her home office, a place she hadn't truly used in years. She opened a cabinet and pulled out a dusty portfolio. Inside, sketches, watercolors, charcoal studies, some from college, some from her early 20s, before children, before mortgage payments, before Martin's career had become both their identities. She hadn't picked up a brush in over 2 decades. She sat on the floor, surrounded by forgotten pieces of herself. And for the first time in years, she felt something stir, something small but fierce. She whispered into the silence, more to herself than anyone. "I used to be someone with color, with vision, a beat past." And then, quietly, she added, "Maybe I still am." Have you ever been in a room full of people, yet felt completely unseen by the one person who should know you best? What would you do if someone pointed out a truth you've tried to ignore for years? Tell me in the comment, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss what Brenda does next. Because one question just lit the fire of a transformation she never saw coming. The next morning, Brenda moved through the kitchen in quiet autopilot. She poured Martin's coffee, made his toast the way he liked it, lightly buttered, cut diagonally, and placed it beside his morning paper. "Big meeting today," he said between sips, not looking up. Brenda paused, then smiled faintly. "No, not much." He didn't notice. He never asked why. After he left, the silence of the house returned like a heavy blanket. But something was different. Brenda didn't clean the dishes right away. She didn't make the bed. She didn't slide back into the rhythm of a life built around someone else's needs. Instead, she went back to her office and reopened the portfolio. The lines of her old work still carried emotion, depth, anger, joy. Her fingers tingled. She reached for an old pencil, the lead still intact, and without thinking, began to draw soft, slow lines at first, then faster, more certain. A woman's profile, the curve of a neck, eyes turned away, half in shadow. A woman not seen. She titled it, "The Edge." That afternoon, she took a quiet step no one knew about. She registered for a local portrait workshop at the Community Arts Center. Thursday evenings. No one from Martin's world would be there. It felt like reclaiming a part of herself she had locked away. At the first class, she arrived early and took a seat in the corner. Her hands trembled. What if she'd lost it? What if this was silly? But then she met Dana. Brenda hadn't seen her in over 30 years. They had studied art together in college. Now Dana was a curator at a local gallery and taught once a week to stay grounded. "Brenda Martin," Dana said, eyebrows rising. Brenda smiled, shy. "It's been a long time." Dana glanced down at Brenda's sketchbook, flipping a few pages. "Not that long," she said with a grin. "You still have it." They reconnected easily, old memories bubbling up through casual conversation. Brenda confessed, "I haven't picked up a brush in over 2 decades." Dana looked at her seriously. "You're better than half my featured artists, Brenda. I mean that." Brenda shook her head. That was another life. "No," Dana said. "That's still your life. You just stopped living it for a while." Something cracked inside her, but this time it didn't hurt. It made room. Back home, Martin was flipping through channels, barely glancing her way. "Where were you tonight?" he asked. "Art class," she replied simply. He chuckled. "That's cute. A little hobby to pass the time, huh?" Brenda didn't answer, but her silence spoke volumes. Later that night, she sat in bed, scrolling through her emails. One caught her eye. From Dana. "Brenda, I wasn't kidding. There's a group exhibition next month. Women over 50, stories through canvas. We need one more artist. I want it to be you." Brenda stared at the screen, heart pounding. She hadn't been anyone's artist in decades. Only wife, helper, background. She looked over at Martin, already asleep, snoring lightly. Then she opened a blank canvas file. Typed her name. Not as Mrs. Martin, just Brenda Ellison. The woman she used to be. The woman she was becoming again. Brenda stood in front of her easel, her fingers stained with charcoal, her heart beating like it hadn't in years. The house was quiet. Martin had left early for a golf meeting. She used to resent his constant absence. Now she welcomed the space. It had become her studio, her sanctuary. The piece she was working on was different from the quiet sketches of the week before. This one was raw, bold. A woman reaching upward, arms outstretched, but her feet tangled in ropes made of clock hands, calendars, and laundry lines. Brenda didn't name it yet. She didn't need to. She knew what it was. It was her. Later that week, she met Dana for lunch at a small bistro near the gallery. "I brought some new work," Brenda said, sliding a folder across the table. Dana opened it slowly, her expression shifting from polite curiosity to something more reverent. "These aren't just good, they're honest." Brenda lowered her gaze. "I didn't know I still had that in me." Dana smiled. "You never lost it. You just stopped being asked what you saw." She paused, then leaned in. "I showed one of your pieces to the gallery team. They want you in the exhibition, but not just on a wall. They want you to speak on opening night." Brenda blinked. "Speak?" Dana nodded. "What it means to come back into view." Brenda laughed, nervous. "What would I even say? Hi. I used to be someone, and then I became no one, and now I'm trying to find her again." Dana's voice softened. "That's exactly what you say. That's exactly what women need to hear." At home, Brenda stood in front of her closet, pulling out an old black sheath dress she hadn't worn in over a decade. It still fit, more or less. She smoothed her hands over it, imagining herself in a room of strangers, standing tall. When Martin came home that night, she was cooking dinner, something simple. "How was art class?" he asked, distracted. "It was good," she replied. He sat at the island, scrolling his phone. "So are you still doing that exhibit thing?" Brenda turned to him. "Yes. It's in 2 weeks." He looked up. "You're really going through with it?" She met his eyes evenly. "Yes, I am." He laughed, light but edged. "Okay. Just don't go making me look bad, all right?" Brenda's smile didn't reach her eyes. "It's not about you, Martin." He didn't respond. The night of the exhibit arrived. Brenda stood in the gallery's back room, her heart pounding as voices filled the space beyond the curtain. Her name was printed on the wall in black ink, Brenda Ellison, the edge, the frame, and the return. She walked out, heels clicking on the hardwood, and stood beside her 3 featured works. People turned to face her. The lights were warm. No one looked away. She cleared her throat, and the words found her. "For most of my life, I thought the best thing I could do was disappear behind the man I married. Behind our children, behind our schedules and dinner plans and holiday cards. I thought being invisible was the price of being supportive. But one day, someone asked me a question." Her eyes scanned the crowd, and in the back, she saw a familiar face. "Elaine?" she asked. "He doesn't see you, does he?" And I realized I didn't either. I had erased myself so slowly, so politely, that I forgot I was ever part of the picture to begin with. She let the silence sit. "But I am. I always was. And so are you." When she finished, the room erupted in applause. Elaine smiled and gave a knowing nod. And Martin, who had slipped in late unannounced, stood in the back, arms folded, unreadable. For once, Brenda didn't look for his reaction. She walked over to her favorite piece, the edge, and traced the corner of the frame. This time, she wasn't standing at the edge. She was finally standing in the center. Brenda's inbox flooded with messages the next morning. Women she didn't know wrote to her like old friends. I cried in front of your painting. You told my story without knowing me. Thank you for reminding me I'm not just someone's wife. She read each one carefully, heart swelling with something unfamiliar. Validation. For decades, she'd moved through life with invisible ink written all over her. Now it felt like someone had taken a highlighter to her soul. She sat at her kitchen table, sipping coffee, staring out the window as Martin walked past, briefcase in hand. He paused. You were good last night, he said awkwardly. Brenda looked up. Thank you. I didn't know people would react that way. Brenda tilted her head. Neither did I. But maybe it was never about what they saw. It was about what they finally felt. Martin hesitated. I read one of the plaques under your painting, the one with the ropes. The clocks. Was that? Brenda didn't answer. She didn't need to. Over the next few weeks, invitations came in faster than she could have imagined. A nonprofit wanted to feature her work in their next awareness campaign about aging women and mental health. A community college offered her a weekend teaching spot. Dana asked if she'd be interested in curating a show about late bloomers. It felt surreal, and yet it felt like coming home. She accepted the teaching job first. It was there she began seeing the same patterns in her students. Older women with soft voices. Women who apologized before showing their work. Women who said, I haven't done this in years. I don't even know if I'm still any good. Brenda would smile and tell them the same thing Dana had told her. You never stopped being an artist. You just stopped being asked what you see. One night, Martin arrived home to find the dining table covered in canvases and brush cups instead of dinner plates. The stove was cold. He stood in the doorway, unsure. You didn't cook tonight, he asked, almost surprised. Brenda looked up from her sketch. No, I was working. He gave a small nod. Of course. He didn't sound angry. More. Lost. She watched him carefully. He was slipping into something she recognized. Uncertainty. A discomfort that came from no longer being the center of gravity in their marriage. Later, as they got ready for bed in separate routines, Martin lingered at the door. You seem far away lately. Brenda brushed her hair slowly. Not far, just forward. He stepped closer. Can I come with you? She looked at him through the mirror. I don't know yet, she said gently. Are you coming because you miss me, or because you miss having me orbit around you? He didn't respond. And that silence told her everything. A few days later, Elaine called. I wanted to, personally, congratulate you, she said. That show made people talk. And not just in the art world. We need more women like you at the table. Brenda smiled. Thank you. I'm still finding my feet. You're doing more than that, Elaine said. You're creating the ground for others to stand on. Elaine paused, then added, There's an opening on our company's arts advisory board. I want your voice in the room. Brenda's breath caught. Why? Because, Elaine said, you know what it feels like to not be seen. And now, you're making sure other women don't go through life that way. Brenda didn't answer right away. She looked out the window, where the late afternoon light spilled across her garden, touching everything gently, deliberately. I'd be honored, she said. As she hung up, Martin entered the room. You look like something big just happened, he said. Brenda smiled. It did. And for once, she didn't explain it. She let the joy be hers, without needing to shrink it for his comfort. She was no longer trying to fit back into her old life. She was building a new one, on her terms, one brushstroke at a time. Brenda stood in the center of her studio, formerly their dining room, surrounded by canvases at various stages of completion. The house no longer smelled like pot roast or lemon cleaner. It smelled like linseed oil and change. She had just finished a piece called Muted Years, a minimalist depiction of a woman's mouth gently covered by her own hand. It was the most vulnerable thing she'd painted yet, and it was already sold. Dana had called that morning. A collector saw it online. Brenda had laughed, half in disbelief, then cried, full of something she hadn't known how to name. That night, Martin came home to find Brenda sitting quietly on the patio, sipping red wine. The sun was low, casting gold across the garden. He stood in the doorway, hesitating. I've been thinking, he said. She didn't respond, just sipped. He stepped outside. I didn't mean to make you invisible, he began, sitting beside her. I thought I was doing what men were supposed to do, provide, protect, keep things running. Brenda turned to look at him. Martin, she said softly, I never needed a provider. I needed a partner, someone who noticed I disappeared, even when I was standing right in front of him. He swallowed. I didn't know how. You seemed fine. She let out a short breath, not quite a laugh, not quite a sigh. I was fine, until I realized I didn't want to just be fine. Martin looked down. You've changed. Brenda tilted her head. No. I returned. There's a difference. A long silence passed between them, years' worth of it. Finally, he said, Is there still room for me? In this version of your life? Brenda stared out at the fading light. For the first time, she didn't rush to soften the moment, to smooth the tension, to say something kind for his sake. Instead, she told the truth. I don't know yet. Martin blinked. You don't? She shook her head. This life. This freedom. He looked away, wounded. Brenda reached out, gently touched his hand. But I'm also not closing the door. Not if you're willing to walk beside me now. Not in front. Not in front. Martin nodded slowly. I want to try. They sat together as the sun dipped behind the trees. The moment was tender, uncertain, real. And yet, somewhere deep inside, Brenda knew. The next morning, an email awaited her from an international art conference in Florence. "We're curating a panel titled Women's Scene, Art as Visibility. We'd be honored if you would represent the North American voice. All expenses paid. Keynote speaker spot available." She stared at the screen, stunned. Florence, Florence. It had been a dream once, a someday, a never happened. Now it was calling her name. She forwarded the email to Dana with one sentence. "I think I'm going." Martin was in the kitchen, reading the paper, sipping coffee. Brenda walked in slowly, holding the printed invitation. He looked up. "Everything okay?" She smiled, wide, calm, unshakable. "Yes," she said. "Everything's more than okay." She placed the letter on the counter. "I'm going to Florence." Martin blinked. "By yourself?" She nodded. "Yes." "And not because I'm leaving you, but because I need to see who I am when I'm completely on my own terms." He stood quietly, then said something she didn't expect. "I hope you see her clearly, and I hope she's everything you hoped for." Brenda studied him. For the first time, it felt like he really meant it. But she also knew this trip wasn't about them. It was about her. And she was ready. Florence was everything Brenda had imagined, and everything she hadn't. The air smelled of espresso, aged stone, and possibility. Every narrow street whispered stories. Every cathedral seemed to speak directly to her soul. But it wasn't just the city that changed her. It was the way people looked at her here. Not as someone's wife, not as a woman of a certain age, but as an artist, a voice, a presence. She was no longer standing in the shadow of anyone's name. She was Brenda Ellison. The conference was held in a sun-filled museum overlooking the Arno River. Artists, curators, and critics filled the space, their voices a low hum of languages and laughter. Brenda stood at the center of a gallery room featuring her work. Muted Years, The Edge, and her newest piece, The Woman Centered. It was a full-length portrait. The same faceless woman from her earlier paintings. But now her back was straight, shoulders square, gaze fixed forward. There was no shadow behind her, only light. A small crowd gathered as Brenda was introduced. She stepped forward, not in nerves, but in purpose. "My name is Brenda Ellison," she began. "For many years I lived just outside the frame. I believed that being supportive meant being silent. That love meant becoming small so someone else could shine." She paused, breathing in the weight of the moment. "But one day, someone asked me a simple question. 'He doesn't see you, does he?' And that question became a mirror. I looked into it, and I didn't see a wife or a role. I saw a woman I hadn't spoken to in decades." Her voice softened. "Art became my language back to myself. And through that, I found a truth I'd long buried. We are not meant to be background characters in our own lives." Applause rose, not polite, but thunderous. She felt it, not just in her ears, but in her skin, her chest, her bones. She was being seen, and more importantly, She was seeing herself. That evening, Brenda stood on the balcony of her temporary apartment, the Duomo glowing in the distance. A video call came in. Martin. She hesitated, then answered. He was sitting at their kitchen table, back home, the one she had once cleared for dinner every night. How was the speech? He asked. It felt right, she said. He smiled. I watched the live stream. You were. Brenda looked down for a moment, then back at the screen. I wasn't trying to be extraordinary, Martin. I was just trying to be real. I know, he said, and I think I finally see the difference. He took a breath. I've been thinking, I don't want to go back to what we were, but I'd like to know who we could be if we both step into the frame. Brenda didn't answer right away. Then, quietly, maybe. Martin nodded. Then I'll be here. When you're ready. She smiled. Not for him, for her. 3 months later, Brenda's Women's Scene exhibit launched in Florence. It featured works by women from around the world, all over 50, women who had once felt invisible. Now their faces, colors, and stories filled the walls. At the center of the gallery stood one final painting, a self-portrait. Brenda, fully rendered, eyes bright, shoulders relaxed, no ropes, no clocks, no shadows, just a woman centered in her own life. As guests mingled, a younger woman approached her with tears in her eyes. Your work. It gave me permission, she said, to stop apologizing for existing. Brenda touched the woman's hand gently. Then it did its job. That night, alone in her studio, Brenda poured a glass of wine, opened a fresh canvas, and whispered something only the walls could hear. I see you. She wasn't talking to the canvas. She was talking to the woman who had waited decades for someone, anyone, to say it. And finally, that someone had been herself. Brenda's journey reminds us that it only takes one question, one moment of truth, to change everything. Have you ever had someone look right through you? Share your story in the comments. We read everyone. Type 2 if this story spoke to your heart, or 7 if it didn't. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more powerful Invisible Wife stories from Revenge with Emma.